Who can resist half off everything in the store on Wednesdays at Salvation Army? I know I can't. I love Wednesdays when they roll around. I love to roam the aisles and look at all the different shirts and outfit combinations that I can make. And I found these combinations here. And all I can think of is what cute fall shirts I can upcycle them into. So follow along and we will make a reverse applique pumpkin shirt made out of a plaid shirt and a sweatshirt. As soon as I got home, I tore off the tags, threw them in the washer and dryer, and couldn't wait for them to be done. My creative juices were flowing, but while they were washing and drying, I worked on the digitizing. I used Embroidery software, and I've probably used this for close to 10 years now, and I absolutely love the program. Look them up. It's a great program for beginners. I imported this free picture of a pumpkin with a leaf from the internet. I imported it as a PNG and then traced it. On the traced lines, I added double cut stitched lines, and then I exported the file as a DST so that anyone can use it since that's a universal file. I've attached it in the description box below. Feel free to take it and use it. Enjoy! So before I embroider, I need to get the shirts ready. Here I'm taking the sweatshirt and I'm cutting off the bottom band. In hindsight, I wish I would have left about a 1/2 inch overage when I cut, so that when I sew it together, I can sew it right up against the seam allowance there on the ribbed banding. But you live and learn. The next step is to cut off the sleeves. I'm leaving about 2 to 3 inches there on the side of the shirt, and I make sure that I measure on each collar from the collar over so that it's even. If you're making this shirt for yourself or a customer and the 2 shirts that you're working with are either too big or too small, this is a great way to either expand the shirt and make it bigger, or make sure that you take less and make the shirt smaller once we sew it together. This is the side I'm talking about. That piece you either make bigger or smaller. Now it's time to get the embroidery hoop ready. I put sticky stabilizer on my fast frame. The embroidery file that I'm going to use is an 8x8 that I digitized. I buy this sticky stabilizer in bulk on Amazon. It's in my Amazon storefront in the description box below if you're interested. This is a different stabilizer. It has a bumpy side, similar to Heat and Bond Light. I'm going to cut an 8x8 sheet of it, and I'm going to iron it onto the plaid fabric. If your fabric has a right side and a wrong side, make sure the bubbly side of the stabilizer is facing the wrong side of your fabric, and that's when you iron it on. The next step is to add the plaid fabric onto my fast frame, and notice that I have the fast frame turned upside down, or I should say turned with the top of the fast frame towards me. By putting my shirt on the fast frame in this order, the most of the bulk of the shirt is going to hang down from the hoop while it's embroidering. So I have to remember to also turn my digitized file upside down. So here I'm centering up the sweatshirt onto the frame, making sure that the collar is at the center of the frame there. And then I have to also pull the sweatshirt up because I want to make sure that the embroidery comes down at least 2.5 to 3 inches below the collar when it stitches out. I also clip the side of the shirt to the side of the frame so that it is nice and taut. I load the shirt onto the embroidery machine and I turn my file upside down. The next step after embroidery, I get my duck-billed applique scissors out. I pull up the t-shirt fabric and I cut in between the cutting lines. I want to expose the plaid underneath. And I just take it nice and slow and make sure that I do not cut my stitches. And I also want to make sure that I don't cut the plaid shirt underneath. Notice that I'm doing it while it's still on the hoop. This way it stays nice and taut, and I don't have to worry about fabric being loose and wiggly and accidentally cutting it by mistake. After I got the fabric going quite a bit from the duck-billed scissors from Appliqué, I got my little tiny micro scissors out and tried to cut the corners so that I could get a nice, sharp, crisp corner. You'll see me intermixing the duck-billed scissors with the little scissors depending on the area that I'm cutting out. Here's the finished applique. You'll notice that the V of the collar is not really in the center of the applique. The main reason is that the collar is actually centered with the applique, but the V is off. And I guess that's the chance you take when you buy secondhand clothes like this. But when I'm wearing it at the end, you don't even notice it. But you always want to make sure your applique is in line with your collar. Next, I take the shirt off of the hoop and then I peel off the sticky stabilizer, but I keep the main stabilizer on the shirt. Next, I take the extra steps to serge around the applique right on the stabilizer. I get as close to the applique as possible and serge around it. Notice I'm pulling the shirt fabric away from the serger needle. I don't want to catch it. If you don't have a serger, you can always use a zigzag stitch on your domestic sewing machine. And here's what my serge seam looks like. For added protection from the embroidery side of the shirt scratching up against your skin, I add on Tender Touch from Sulky. It's an iron-on stabilizer, but really soft to the touch. And this is just like the finishing touch to the shirt. It makes it wearable without itching. So next I laid out my sleeves next to my shirt, and notice the width of that plaid. This is where I mean if you want your shirt to be wider or narrower, this is your opportunity before you cut your plaid to decide how wide you need your shirt, because sometimes when you cut and sew, you're making it smaller, and you got to be careful with that. I also need to remove this pocket. So next I marked my sleeve front by sticking pins in it. And then I make sure I line up the seam of the shoulder with the seam of the shoulder on the sweatshirt side, ensuring that right sides are together. So those pins right there remind me which side is my right side. Then I lay it on top of my sweatshirt and I match up my shoulder seams. I continue pinning down the front of the shirt and the back of the shirt, and I do this to each side. Next, I serge down the sides of the shirt. And this is an opportunity for you, if you don't have a serger, to make sure you zigzag down the side of your shirt on your domestic sewing machine. Actually, what you should do is sew a straight stitch and then zigzag down the side, because you want to make sure you have a solid line of stitches going down. each side of your shirt. But the zigzag will help it from fraying. Here's what the serge seam looks like from the front. And it just looks like a real professional finish. After you get both sides sewn on, we want to even up the bottom of the shirt, and then we are going to sew on the rib band down at the bottom. With the bottom of the shirt being so uneven, I wanted to make sure that each side measured the same. So I got out my long ruler and I laid it on top of the shirt. And I'm making sure that the ruler sits at the shoulder seam and then comes down to the bottom, and I take my first measurement. Then I'd go over to the other shoulder seam and I do the same thing. And I'm using my heat erasable pen to do this with, so that when I do the ironing, the pen marks will go away. Now it's time to prepare the rib band down at the bottom, the waistband. And I cut up the side seam of my waistband, and I will sew that together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, right sides together, to get it to be a circle. In hindsight, what I'm going to do on my future shirts is poke a little hole a 1/2 inch above the shirt waistband and then just cut a complete circle, so that I'm not cutting into the waistband and losing some inches off of my waistband when I sew it together. Next, I find the seam of the waistband and I align it with the seam of the side of the shirt. And this automatically makes that circle, that rib band circle, in half. So both of my sides will get pinned together at the side seams of the shirt and the side seams of the waistband. And then I will also find the center of the waistband front and back and give that a pin in place. So I will end up with 4 pins on my waistband when I'm done, and then I will serge it together on the serger. Notice that I have the right sides of the shirt and the right sides of the waistband facing each other, right sides together, and I also have the raw edge of the waistband aligned with the raw edge of the shirt. Notice the shirt is larger than the band, and that's the way it should be. We'll stretch the band to match the shirt size at the bottom while we sew. I sew a little, I stop, I readjust the band to stretch it and fit the bottom of the shirt, and I do this all the way around until I get back to the starting point. And here's the finished shirt. I think the band turned out pretty cute. Now, one thing extra that you can add is do the banding on the bottom of the sleeves as well. I didn't do it on this shirt, but I think in the future ones I will also add the ribbed banding to each of the sleeves, and that way it looks more like a sweatshirt. Here's the finished shirt. It sure did turn out cute, don't you think? Please like and subscribe and follow along, and I'll see you in the next video.